The first time Lynn saw her own face, looking back at her from an unfamiliar mirror, she dismissed it as exhaustion. 30 years old and already pushing the boundaries of consciousness research. She had become accustomed to the occasional hallucination after long hours in the lab. But this was different. The reflection smiled when she frowned. Nebula City hung suspended in the stratosphere of 2147, a marvel of humanity's ingenuity and stubborn refusal to accept Earth's limitations. Transparent walkways connected floating platforms of gleaming metal and crystalline structures, all bathed in the perpetual glow of artificial sunlight. From her apartment on the 73rd level, Lynn could see the entire eastern quadrant, research centers, residential towers, and the imposing silhouette of the Eternus Tower where the city's governing body operated. As a consciousness researcher at the Nexus Institute, Lynn had dedicated her life to understanding the fundamental nature of human awareness. Her latest project, Consciousness Travel, represented the culmination of decades of theoretical work, finally entering the experimental phase. The technology allowed for the projection of one's consciousness across space, and theoretically, across dimensional boundaries. That morning, as dawn broke over the floating metropolis, Lynn prepared for another day of experiments. Her apartment was sparsely decorated. Functionality trumped aesthetics in her world. Holographic displays covered the walls, continuously updating with research data, news, and communications. "Project status update," she commanded, and the central display illuminated with her latest experimental protocols. Consciousness, travel experiment, 47B status, ready for human trial. Candidate, Nguyen. Lynn, authorization, pending. Lynn took a deep breath. After months of animal trials and simulations, the research committee had finally approved her as the first human subject. The implications were enormous. If successful, the technology could revolutionize everything from space exploration to medical treatment. She reached for the small device on her nightstand, a sleek metallic disc no larger than her palm, with intricate circuitry visible beneath its transparent surface. The Consciousness Travel Device, or CTD, represented 5 years of her life's work. It could project her awareness to any physical location within range, allowing her to experience environments too hostile or distant for physical travel. But theoretical models suggested something far more extraordinary: the possibility of traveling to parallel realities, worlds where history had taken different turns, where choices made differently had created alternate versions of existence. As she prepared to leave, a notification flashed across her personal interface. Anomalous data detected in personal archive. Curious, Lynn opened the file. It appeared to be a journal, her journal, with her handwriting and thought patterns, but containing entries describing events she had never experienced. "Today, I watched the sunrise from Mount Everest. The atmospheric restoration project has finally succeeded. The air is breathable up to 9,000 meters without assistance. I never thought I'd see this day, especially after what happened in New Beijing." Lynn frowned. She had never been to Mount Everest, and the atmospheric restoration project was still in its early stages, nowhere near success. And New Beijing? The city had been abandoned after the climate collapse of 2089, long before she was born. She scrolled through more entries, each describing a life parallel to hers, but fundamentally different. A life in a world where she existed, but not as she knew herself. The journal was dated with tomorrow's date. Before she could investigate further, her CTD emitted a soft pulse of light, then began to hum with increasing intensity. Alarmed, Lynn reached for it, but the moment her fingers touched the surface, the world around her shattered into fractals of light. She felt her consciousness compress, stretch, and then expand explosively, like a rubber band pulled to its limit and then released. Colors she had no names for flashed before her eyes. Sounds that shouldn't exist reverberated through her mind. Then, abruptly, silence. Lynn opened her eyes to find herself still in Nebula City, but not her Nebula City. The differences were subtle at first. The quality of light was softer, more golden. The architectural style of the buildings featured more curves and fewer harsh angles. And in the distance, where Eternus Tower should have dominated the skyline, stood a spiraling structure of impossible geometry. "Unauthorized consciousness detected," announced a mechanical voice from everywhere and nowhere. "Initiating containment protocols." Lynn felt a tightening around her awareness, like invisible hands attempting to restrain her thoughts. She concentrated, fighting against the pressure, and found that she could resist, barely. "Identity confirmation required," the voice continued. "State designation." "Lynn Nguyen," she replied, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Consciousness researcher, Nexus Institute." A pause. "No matching identity in database. Designating as unauthorized entity. Consciousness enforcement dispatched." Red lights began flashing throughout the city. In the distance, sleek vehicles detached from a central hub and moved in her direction with alarming speed. Lynn realized with growing panic that she had indeed accomplished what her research had only theorized. She had projected her consciousness into a parallel world, one where she apparently did not exist. Running on instinct, she fled into the labyrinth of transparent walkways, connecting the floating platforms of Nebula. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of her situation. If this was truly a parallel world, then the journal she had discovered must have belonged to her counterpart from this reality, a version of herself who had somehow sent it across the dimensional barrier. But why, and more importantly, where was this world's version of her now? The pursuit vehicles were closing in, their sleek black forms gliding effortlessly through the air. Lynn ducked into a crowded transit hub, hoping to lose herself among the morning commuters. The people around her appeared largely similar to those in her world, though fashion trends and styles showed subtle differences. No one paid her any particular attention, which suggested that her physical appearance remained unchanged, or perhaps didn't exist at all in this physical space. Consciousness travelers maintain a quantum-entangled connection to their original physical form. She remembered from her own research. The observer effect creates a temporary physical manifestation in the destination reality, which meant she was simultaneously here and not here, a paradox of existence that her research had predicted but never proven. Until now. A familiar face in the crowd caught her attention. Min, her closest friend and colleague from the Nexus Institute. Relief flooded through her as she pushed her way toward him. "Min, thank God you're here. Something's happened with the CTD." But as she reached him, Min's expression hardened into one of cold recognition. In a fluid motion, he drew a device from his jacket that resembled a more advanced version of her own CTD. "Unauthorized traveler identified," he stated flatly, all warmth absent from his voice. "You will remain in place while your consciousness is processed." Lynn recoiled in shock. "Min, it's me, Lynn!" A flicker of confusion crossed his features. "That designation is not recognized. I am Agent Min of the Consciousness Enforcement Division. You are in violation of Interdimensional Protocol 7A. Compliance is mandatory." She backed away slowly. This wasn't her friend. Or rather, this was a version of her friend who had taken a very different path in this reality. A government agent rather than a fellow researcher. "I don't belong here," Lynn tried to explain. "There's been an accident with my consciousness travel device. I need to return to my own reality." Min's expression shifted subtly. "Consciousness travel technology is classified. Your knowledge of it confirms your status as a security threat." He raised the device. "You will be contained and processed." Lynn turned and ran, pushing through the crowd. Behind her, she heard Min calling for backup. The transit hub's exits began sealing themselves automatically, transparent barriers materializing to block her escape. Thinking quickly, Lynn spotted a maintenance corridor, and slipped inside, just as the final barrier closed. The narrow passageway led deeper into the infrastructure of the floating city, away from the public areas and, hopefully, away from her pursuers. As she navigated the maintenance tunnels, Lynn tried to make sense of her situation. She had successfully projected her consciousness into a parallel world, one where she evidently did not exist, at least not in any recognized capacity. Yet she had found a journal written by herself from this world. A paradox. Unless the journal wasn't from this world's version of me, she murmured to herself. It was from a version of me who had already traveled here and back, which meant consciousness travel between parallel realities was not only possible, but had already been achieved. By herself, in some future timeline. The implications were staggering. The tunnel eventually opened into a vast chamber filled with humming machinery, one of Nebula's anti-gravity generators that kept the city aloft. Workers in maintenance uniforms moved about, checking systems and performing adjustments. None of them paid any attention to Lynn as she emerged from the service tunnel. Taking advantage of their indifference, she appropriated a worker's jacket from a hook near the entrance, hoping it would help her blend in. As she put it on, she felt something in the pocket, an access card with the name Alara Quinn, printed beneath a photo of a woman who looked nothing like Lynn. The name struck a chord of recognition. Dr. Quinn, her mentor, and the original theorist behind consciousness travel. If anyone could help her understand what was happening, it would be Quinn, or this world's version of her. Using the stolen access card, Lynn made her way to a data terminal. The interface was similar enough to those in her world that she could navigate it with minimal difficulty. She searched for information about Dr. Quinn and found something unexpected. Dr. Alara Quinn, Director, Parallax Initiative. Location, Eternus Tower, Level 108. Status, Restricted Access. Parallax. The term was familiar from her research, a reference to the apparent displacement of an object when viewed from different positions. In consciousness theory, it referred to the subjective differences in perception between individuals. But an initiative, and headed by Dr. Quinn. Lynn dug deeper, using her knowledge of system architecture to bypass security protocols. What she found sent a chill through her. Project Parallax, Unified Consciousness, Directive, Objective, Elimination of Parallel Consciousness, Divergence. Phase 1, Identification of Dimensional Duplicates. Phase 2, Forced Consciousness, Convergence. Phase 3, Singularity Achievement. The documents detailed a massive government program designed to identify and process individuals with parallel versions in other realities. The stated goal was to force a convergence, essentially merging all versions of a person across all realities into a single, unified consciousness. And Dr. Quinn, or this world's version of her, was leading the effort. Processing unauthorized data access, announced the system suddenly. Security alert initiated. Lynn quickly disconnected from the terminal, but not before downloading what information she could to a portable device she found attached to the workstation. She needed to understand what she was up against, and more importantly, how to get back to her own reality. As alarms began to sound throughout the facility, Lynn made her way to an emergency exit. The city beyond was now on high alert, with security drones patrolling the walkways and consciousness enforcement agents stopping citizens for identity verification. She needed a safe place to process the information she'd gathered and formulate a plan. In her world, there was an abandoned research outpost in the lower levels of Nebula that she and Min had sometimes used when they needed privacy for unsanctioned experiments. If the parallel held true, it might exist here as well. Navigating carefully through maintenance corridors and service tunnels, Lynn made her way down through the levels of the floating city. The architecture grew older and less maintained the deeper she descended. until she reached the underbelly of Nebula, a twilight zone of forgotten infrastructure and neglected machinery. To her relief, the outpost existed in this world too, though it appeared to have been abandoned for much longer than in her reality. Dust covered the surfaces, and some of the equipment had been salvaged, leaving empty spaces where advanced technology had once stood. But the basic systems still functioned. Lynn activated the outpost's isolated power supply and began reviewing the data she had stolen. Project Parallax had been initiated 15 years ago, following the discovery of consciousness bleed-through between parallel realities. Researchers had detected anomalous thought patterns that couldn't be attributed to any known consciousness in their world, visitors, like Lynn, from other dimensions. Rather than establishing communication or peaceful exchange, the authorities in this world had determined that the existence of multiple versions of the same individual across different realities represented an existential threat. Their solution was Project Parallax, a program designed to locate every version of every person across all accessible realities and force them to converge into a single consciousness. The process was described clinically in the documents, but the implications horrified Lynn. Convergence wasn't cooperation or peaceful coexistence. It was consumption. The strongest consciousness would absorb the others, effectively erasing them from existence. And leading this entire initiative was Dr. Alara Quinn, the parallel version of Lynn's own mentor. As she processed this information, Lynn became aware of a subtle change in the atmosphere of the outpost. The air seemed to thicken, and the shadows in the corners deepened. A familiar sensation washed over her, the same feeling she experienced during consciousness travel experiments. She wasn't alone. "I've been waiting for you," said a voice identical to her own. Lynn spun around to face herself, or rather, someone who looked exactly like her, down to the smallest detail. But there was a hardness in this other Lynn's eyes, a coldness that felt alien. "You don't exist here," the doppelganger stated flatly. "Yet, here you are. A paradox I've been trying to resolve for some time." Lynn stood her ground, though her heart raced. "Who are you really?" A smile that didn't reach the eyes. "I'm you, of course, the you that belongs in this reality, though I've evolved beyond what you currently are." "That's not possible," Lynn countered. "The system doesn't recognize me. Min didn't know me. If I existed here, there would be records." "Records can be erased," the doppelganger replied. "Identities can be adjusted. When you work at the level I do, reality becomes more flexible." Realization dawned on Lynn. "You're with Parallax." "I am Parallax," the other Lynn corrected. "Or its true architect, at least. Dr. Quinn provides the public face, but the vision is mine. A vision of forced convergence, eliminating parallel consciousnesses." The doppelganger circled Lynn, slowly, studying her with clinical detachment. "You understand so little. Consciousness divergence is a cancer spreading across the multiverse. Every decision, every quantum choice, splits reality into increasingly fragmented versions. The result is chaos, diluted potential spread across infinite realities instead of concentrated in one." She gestured expansively. "Imagine the greatness humanity could achieve if all versions of a person were unified, all their knowledge, experience, and skills combined into one superior being. We would become gods." "At the cost of individual autonomy," Lynn argued. "You're not talking about cooperation. You're describing consumption, annihilation of consciousness." "Evolution requires sacrifice," the doppelganger dismissed. "The strongest version survives and carries forward. That's natural law." Lynn felt a chill as she recognized the implication. "And you believe you're the strongest version of us?" The smile returned, colder than before. "I know I am. I've already absorbed 17 versions of myself from across the multiverse. Each one has made me stronger, more complete." She extended a hand toward Lynn. You could join us willingly. The process is less traumatic that way. Lynn backed away. That's what the journal was, a trap. You planted it in my reality to draw me here. A beacon, the doppelganger corrected. Consciousness seeks its other parts naturally. I simply provided a path. She tilted her head curiously. But you're different from the others. Your resistance is stronger. Your consciousness has an unusual integrity to it. Taking advantage of the doppelganger's momentary distraction, Lynn lunged for the door. To her surprise, she passed right through her double, as if the other woman were merely a projection. I'm not physically here, the doppelganger explained, seemingly amused by Lynn's attempt. My consciousness operates on a higher plane now. I no longer need to manifest fully in base reality. Lynn ran, nonetheless, bursting out of the outpost and into the shadowy underbelly of Nebula. She needed to find a way back to her own reality before this twisted version of herself could capture and absorb her consciousness. But how? The CTD that had brought her here had vanished during the transition. Without it, she had no obvious way to project her consciousness back to its origin point. As she navigated through the dim corridors of Lower Nebula, a new plan began to form. If Parallax was researching consciousness travel between realities, they must have technology that could send her home. Technology located in Eternus Tower, where Dr. Quinn operated. The tower now represented both her greatest danger and her only hope of escape. Nebula's lower levels connected to the central transportation network through a series of maintenance elevators designed for service workers. Using the stolen access card, Lynn managed to board one such elevator and begin the long ascent toward the city's main level. As the elevator rose, Lynn reviewed what she knew about Parallax and the situation she faced. Her doppelganger claimed to have absorbed multiple versions of herself from across different realities. If true, this explained the journal. It contained memories from one of those absorbed consciousnesses, memories that had leaked across the dimensional barrier. But something didn't add up. If her double was truly as powerful as she claimed, why hadn't she simply taken Lynn's consciousness immediately? Why the conversation, the explanation? The elevator chimed softly as it reached the main level. The doors opened to reveal a nebulous city on lockdown. Security drones patrolled in tight formations, scanning citizens with penetrating beams of blue light. Consciousness enforcement agents stood at checkpoints, verifying identities with devices similar to the one Min had carried. Staying within the maintenance corridors, Lynn made her way toward Eternus Tower. The spiraling structure dominated the skyline, its impossible geometry seeming to bend the light around it. Unlike the Eternus Tower in her reality, a symbol of governance and civic pride, this version radiated an aura of menace. As she approached, Lynn spotted a familiar figure entering through a side entrance. Min, not her friend, but the agent who had tried to apprehend her earlier. An idea formed, risky, but potentially her best option. Timing her approach carefully to avoid the security drones, Lynn followed Agent Min at a distance. He used his credentials to pass through several security checkpoints, unaware of her presence several meters behind. At each barrier, Lynn waited until other workers approached, then blended into their group to slip through. Inside the tower, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. The air seemed charged with potential, as if reality itself were thinner here, more malleable. Lynn could feel a subtle pressure against her consciousness, not the aggressive restraint she had experienced earlier, but a constant, gentle push, like swimming against a current. She followed Min to a restricted elevator that required both credential verification and consciousness scanning. This presented a problem. She could potentially use the stolen access card, but her consciousness would immediately trigger alarms. Fortune intervened in the form of a small maintenance robot that approached the elevator just as Min entered. The machine's simple purpose was to clean and maintain the elevator systems, but it provided Lynn with an opportunity. As the robot extended its interface to connect with the elevator systems, Lynn quickly removed a panel from its back and adjusted its programming. The robot's consciousness signature, simple and mechanical though it was, would now mask her own when she entered the elevator. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it might be enough to get her past the initial scanning. Her improvised plan worked, though not without consequence. The elevator accepted her presence but flagged an anomaly in its system. By the time she reached the 108th floor, Dr. Quinn's level, according to the stolen data, a secondary security protocol had been initiated. Consciousness anomaly detected on level 108, announced the building system. Security sweep commencing in 3 minutes. Lynn stepped out into a vast, open space, unlike anything in her version of Eternus Tower. The entire floor appeared to be a single laboratory, with concentric rings of equipment surrounding a central platform. Holographic displays showed countless data streams, some recognizable as consciousness wave patterns, others completely alien to her understanding. And there, standing at a control console near the center, was Dr. Alara Quinn. The woman bore only a passing resemblance to Lynn's mentor. This Quinn was older, her face lined with the kind of hardness that comes from making difficult decisions without remorse. Her white hair was pulled back severely, and her posture suggested military training rather than academic background. "Dr. Quinn," Lynn called out, deciding that directness was her only remaining option. Quinn turned, her expression registering mild surprise rather than alarm. "Unauthorized presence detected," she stated calmly. "Identify yourself." "My name is Lynn Nguyen. I'm a consciousness researcher from a parallel reality. I was brought here against my will when my consciousness travel device activated unexpectedly." Quinn studied her with cold, scientific interest. "Fascinating. A natural traveler rather than one of our extraction subjects. Your consciousness signature must be extraordinarily resilient to have maintained coherence during unguided transit." "I need to return to my reality," Lynn stated plainly. "You have the technology to send me back." A thin smile crossed Quinn's face. "Indeed we do. But why would we assist in your departure when your consciousness represents such valuable research material? Particularly given your connection to Subject Parallax Prime." "Subject Parallax Prime?" "The entity you encountered in the lower levels. The consciousness that once belonged to this reality's version of you." Quinn gestured to a holographic display showing a familiar face, Lynn's face, but with that same cold hardness she had seen in her doppelganger. "She was our first success, the first to achieve multiple consciousness convergence." "She told me she was the architect of parallax," Lynn said. Quinn laughed, a sharp sound, devoid of humor. "She believes that. A necessary delusion we maintain to ensure her cooperation. In truth, she is as much a subject as any other consciousness we process." The implications struck Lynn with horrible clarity. "You're using her, using me, as a test subject for consciousness manipulation? Every version of you across the multiverse shares a particular quality," Quinn explained, as if discussing an interesting specimen. "An unusual resilience to consciousness fragmentation, where most minds shatter when forced to confront their parallel versions. Yours consistently demonstrates the ability to integrate and adapt, which makes me the perfect guinea pig for your experiments in forced convergence," Lynn concluded bitterly. "Precisely." Quinn pressed a sequence of commands into her console. The central platform began to glow with increasing intensity. "And now that you're here, we can proceed with the next phase. Parallax Prime has been waiting for a new integration. Your arrival is most fortuitous." Security drones began to emerge from recessed compartments around the laboratory. Unlike the ones patrolling the city, these were clearly designed for consciousness containment, their structures incorporating the same technology as Lynn's CTD, but weaponized. "Security sweep commencing," announced the system. Lynn backed toward the elevator, but found her path blocked by more drones. She was trapped. "There's no escape," Quinn stated matter-of-factly. Your consciousness will be contained and prepared for convergence with Parallax Prime. The process is not painless, but it is relatively quick. Your individual awareness will cease, but your memories and capabilities will enhance the Prime consciousness. And if I refuse? Refusal is not a variable in the process, Quinn replied, her tone suggesting the question was nonsensical. Consciousness, once isolated from its physical anchor, can be manipulated like any other form of energy. Yours will be redirected and integrated regardless of your preference. The drones moved closer, their consciousness-dampening fields beginning to affect Lynn's perception. The edges of her vision darkened, and she felt a pressure building inside her mind, as if something were trying to compress her very thoughts. In desperation, Lynn focused on the one thing she knew better than anyone else in either reality: her own consciousness travel technology. The principles were the same, even if Parallax had weaponized them. Every system had its vulnerabilities, its resonance frequencies that could disrupt its operation. Concentrating with all her might, Lynn visualized her consciousness not as a passive entity to be captured, but as an active force, a wave that could interfere with the drone's containment fields. Anomalous consciousness activity detected, one of the drones reported. Containment field experiencing interference. Quinn looked up sharply from her console. Impossible! Increase field strength to maximum. The pressure in Lynn's mind intensified painfully, but she maintained her focus, pushing back against the containment field with everything she had. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she fought against the technology designed to capture and redirect her very being. Just as she felt her resistance beginning to fail, the elevator doors opened behind the drones. Agent Min stepped out, his consciousness containment device at the ready. Dr. Quinn, he acknowledged with a nod. I tracked the anomaly to this level. I'll assist with containment. Quinn frowned slightly. This is a restricted operation. Agent Min, your assistance is not required or authorized. But instead of standing down, Min raised his device and pointed it at Quinn. Consciousness override initiated, he stated firmly. Security protocol Obsidian Shadow enacted. Quinn's eyes widened in genuine surprise, perhaps the first real emotion Lynn had seen from her. You're not authorized. I am now, Min cut her off. By order of Internal Security Division, Parallax has exceeded its mandate. The convergence experiments end today. The drones surrounding Lynn hesitated, their programming conflicted by the contradictory commands. In that moment of confusion, Lynn pushed back with renewed determination against the containment fields, causing a cascade failure that disabled the nearest drones. The laboratory erupted into chaos. Alarms blared as Quinn attempted to lock down her systems. Min advanced, his device maintaining its lock on the doctor's consciousness. And in the center of it all, the platform glowed with increasing intensity, its purpose still unclear to Lynn. The convergence chamber is reaching critical threshold, Quinn shouted over the alarms. If you interrupt the process now, the consciousness fragmentation will be catastrophic. Min hesitated, his training warring with his mission. Lynn took advantage of the moment to dash toward the central platform, not to escape, but to understand. If this was the heart of Parallax's technology, it might also be her only way home. As she approached, the platform's glow intensified, responding to her presence. The holographic displays around it shifted, showing her consciousness signature, interacting with the system's fields. Step away from the convergence chamber, Quinn commanded. You don't understand what you're interfacing with. But Lynn did understand, at least in principle. The technology was a more advanced version of her own CTD, designed not just to project consciousness across realities, but to capture and redirect it. The platform was essentially a larger, more powerful version of her device. And if it could send consciousness across dimensions, it could send hers back where it belonged. Before she could act on this realization, a new presence entered the laboratory, one that needed no doors or elevators. The air shimmered, and Parallax Prime, the other Lynn, materialized beside the platform. "Attempting to leave so soon?" the doppelganger asked, her voice echoing strangely, as if speaking from multiple throats simultaneously. "Our convergence is inevitable. Why fight what must be?" Lynn faced her counterpart, seeing in those cold eyes the reflection of what she might become if she surrendered to Parallax's vision. Because existence isn't about inevitability. It's about choice, the very choices that create parallel realities in the first place. Choices are illusions born of limited perspective, Parallax Prime dismissed. When you see, as I do, across all realities simultaneously, you understand that every path converges eventually. I'm simply accelerating the process. The doppelganger extended her hand, and Lynn felt an immediate pull on her consciousness. Not the mechanical pressure of the drone's containment fields, but something deeper, more fundamental. A recognition, a resonance between identical patterns across different realities. "Your consciousness calls to mine," Parallax Prime continued. "Feel it? That's the natural order asserting itself. Convergence is not destruction, it's completion." For a moment, Lynn did feel it, a seductive sense of belonging, of coming home after a long journey. Parts of her consciousness began to align with her counterparts, memories overlapping, thoughts synchronizing. It would be so easy to let go, to allow this merger to happen. "Lynn, don't!" Min's voice cut through her momentary surrender. "That's not unity. It's absorption. You'll cease to exist as yourself." His intervention broke the spell. Lynn pulled back mentally, reasserting the boundaries of her own consciousness. "I choose to remain myself," she declared, both to Parallax Prime and to herself. "All versions of myself, across all realities, deserve that same choice." Rage distorted Parallax Prime's features. "You refuse perfection out of fear. Your consciousness will join mine, willingly or not." She turned toward Quinn. "Activate the convergence chamber. Maximum extraction protocol." Quinn hesitated, looking between Min's weapon and Parallax Prime's fury. "The system isn't calibrated for forced extraction at that level. The consciousness fragmentation could cascade beyond control." "Do it now!" Parallax Prime demanded, her form flickering as her anger disrupted her manifestation. In that moment of distraction, Lynn made her decision. The convergence chamber, now clearly identified as such, was her only hope of return. But it needed to be reconfigured from an extraction device to a projection system, essentially reversing its function. Diving toward the nearest control console, Lynn called upon all her knowledge of consciousness travel technology. The interface was more advanced than anything in her reality, but the underlying principles remained the same. She began rapidly adjusting parameters, redirecting energy flows, reversing polarity fields. "Stop her!" Parallax Prime commanded the remaining drones. But Min intercepted them, his device disrupting their coordination. "Consciousness fragmentation imminent," warned the system, as Lynn's adjustments took effect. "Convergence chamber, reconfiguring to projection mode. Warning, destination coordinates undefined." Lynn knew she needed a target, a specific reality to project her consciousness toward. Without one, she risked being lost in the void between worlds. Her consciousness scattered across infinite possibilities. "My physical form," she realized aloud. "My body in my original reality. It's still connected to my consciousness through quantum entanglement. That's my anchor point." She focused intensely on that connection, visualizing her body waiting in her apartment, in her version of Nebula City. The system responded, the holographic displays shifting to show a tenuous link, stretching across dimensional boundaries. "Connection established," the system confirmed. "Projection target identified. Reality designation 4827 Alpha." "No!" Parallax Prime, lunged toward the platform, her form becoming more solid as she channeled her considerable power. "You belong with us! With me!" The convergence chamber's energy field expanded, enveloping both Lin and her approaching doppelganger. The unexpected interaction between two identical consciousness patterns from different realities created a feedback loop in the system. Critical energy surge detected. The system announced dispassionately. Consciousness barrier collapse in progress. Reality segregation failing. The laboratory around them began to shimmer and distort as the boundaries between realities weakened. Glimpses of other versions of the same space flickered in and out of existence, some nearly identical, others wildly different. In some, Dr. Quinn was younger, kinder. In others, she was absent entirely. Min appeared and disappeared in different positions, sometimes as an agent, sometimes as a researcher, sometimes as something not entirely human. And at the center of it all stood Lin and Parallax Prime, their consciousnesses both repelling and attracting each other in a paradoxical dance. "What have you done?" Parallax Prime demanded, genuine fear breaking through her cold composure for the first time. "The boundaries are collapsing." "Not collapsing," Lin corrected, understanding flooding through her as she witnessed the multiverse unfolding around them. "Realigning. You tried to force convergence between consciousnesses that were never meant to merge. The natural order is reasserting itself." The energy field of the convergence chamber intensified, pulling both Lin and her doppelganger toward its center. But instead of merging their consciousnesses, as Parallax had intended, it was creating a choice point, a nexus where multiple realities overlapped, allowing for transfer between them. "This is your last chance," Lin told her counterpart, extending her hand in a mirror of Parallax Prime's earlier gesture. "Not for convergence, but for understanding. We don't have to consume each other to be complete." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across the doppelganger's face, a glimpse of the person she might have been before Parallax's experiments twisted her purpose. "But I've already absorbed so many. They're part of me now. I can't undo what's been done." "Not undo," Lin corrected, "but honor. Carry their memories without erasing their individual significance. That's the true potential of consciousness. Not convergence, but connection while maintaining integrity." Around them, the laboratory continued to shift between different versions of itself as reality fluctuated. Dr. Quinn was shouting commands that no one heeded, while Min stood transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before him. The convergence chamber reached critical energy levels, the platform now a blinding column of light that stretched upward through the ceiling and downward through the floor, connecting to other versions of itself across multiple realities. Parallax Prime stared at Lin's outstretched hand, conflict evident in her expression. "I don't know how to exist any other way now," she admitted, her voice suddenly smaller, more human. "I've been Parallax for so long." "Then learn," Lin urged. "That's what consciousness is for. Learning, growing, changing without losing yourself." With visible reluctance, Parallax Prime reached out and took Lin's hand. The moment their consciousnesses connected directly, without the intermediary of Parallax's technology, something unexpected happened. Instead of one absorbing the other, they began to resonate. Two identical patterns finding harmony rather than dominance. Memories flowed between them, not as consumption, but as sharing. Lin experienced her counterpart's pain and ambition, her fear and power. Parallax Prime felt Lin's determination and compassion, her curiosity and integrity. "System overload imminent," announced the building's AI, its voice distorting as reality continued to fluctuate. "Convergence chamber collapse in 10 seconds. You need to go," Parallax Prime told Lin, a new resolve in her voice. "Return to your reality. I'll remain here and dismantle what Parallax has built. It's time this experiment ended." What about the other consciousnesses? The ones you've absorbed? A sad smile touched Parallax Prime's lips. I'll find a way to honor them, as you suggested. Perhaps they can never be fully separated again, but I can ensure they're remembered as individuals, not just components of myself. The chamber's energy field began to contract, the window of opportunity for transfer closing rapidly. Go! Parallax Prime urged, releasing Lin's hand and stepping back. Your reality needs you to continue your research, the right way, the ethical way. Don't make our mistakes. Lin nodded, understanding that this moment represented more than her personal journey home. It was a turning point for consciousness research across multiple realities, a chance to pursue understanding without exploitation, connection without consumption. As the convergence chamber reached its final countdown, Lin stepped fully into the column of light. She felt her consciousness compress, stretch, and then expand. The same sensation she had experienced during her unexpected journey here, but now controlled, directed. The last thing she saw before reality shifted completely was her doppelganger raising a hand in farewell, not as Parallax Prime, but simply as another Lin, following her own path. Then everything went white. Lin opened her eyes to find herself in her apartment in Nebula City, her Nebula City, with its familiar skyline and the imposing silhouette of Eternus Tower in the distance. Her CTD lay on the nightstand, now dormant, its circuitry dark. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a dream or hallucination, a product of exhaustion and too many late nights in the lab. But when she checked her personal interface, she found new data had been integrated into her research files. Detailed schematics for consciousness travel safeguards, ethical protocols for cross-dimensional contact, warnings about forced convergence. A gift from her counterpart, ensuring that this reality would never follow Parallax's path. And there, in her personal archive, was the journal, the anomalous file that had started her journey. But now, it contained new entries, documenting not just experiences she had never had, but reflections on the nature of consciousness and identity across multiple realities. The final entry read simply, "Existence is not a zero-sum game. Our consciousness can expand without consuming others. Remember this when the temptation for convergence arises, as it inevitably will. Some boundaries exist not to limit us, but to define us. Some walls should not be torn down, but rather made permeable. This is the lesson of the multiverse." Lin sat back, absorbing the implications of her experience. Her consciousness travel research would continue, but with a new perspective and purpose. The technology had the potential to revolutionize humanity's understanding of reality and consciousness, but also the potential for terrible abuse if developed along Parallax's lines. She thought of Min, her Min, not the agent from the parallel world, and how he would react when she shared her discoveries. Would he believe her? Would anyone? The data she had brought back would help, but the full significance of her journey might be difficult to convey. As dawn broke over Nebula City, painting the floating metropolis in hues of gold and rose, Lin made a decision. She would pursue her research with renewed vigor, but also with caution and ethical restraint. She would develop safeguards to prevent the kind of consciousness manipulation Parallax had performed. And most importantly, she would remember that across the infinite expanse of parallel realities, every version of every person deserved the right to their own unique existence, connected to their counterparts by the resonance of shared potential, but never subsumed or erased. The world where she never existed had shown her the true value of existing as herself. With this resolution in mind, Lin began preparing for a new day of experiments, not as conquest of the unknown, but as respectful exploration of the multiverse's greatest mystery, consciousness itself, in all its parallel expressions. And somewhere across the dimensional barriers, she knew another Lin was doing the same.